Hello, listeners. Welcome to CareSmartz360 On Air. I'm Carolina Gonzaga, an account executive here at CareSmartz360. Today, I'm interviewing Sami Asaad, a partner at Pierson Ferdinand LLP and chair of their health and home care practice. He counsels home care and staffing businesses nationwide on employment risk, compliance, and tough personal issues. Recognized for his employment law and management expertise, Sami helps leaders pull legal clarity from very complex HR challenges. In this episode, he's going to walk us through all of it. Truly a legal playbook for those of us who may not even speak legal. What I love about this episode is that Sami really simplifies his best practices and advice in a way that we can all understand and benefit from. So please join me in welcoming Sami Asaad.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is kind of a great time because I'm going to be seeing you next week at the conference in Dallas. And so this is just the start, everybody, to many more conversations I'm sure that we'll have. And so, Sami, before we kind of dive into the questions that I prepared for you, I've done a lot of podcasts with CareSmartz. This is the first one on this topic. So you're a partner at Pierson Ferdinand LLP and the chair of their home care health and home care practice. So I'd love to find out about how Sami ends up in this role, kind of in this growing industry of home care. What's the
Sure.
journey of you to today?
Oh boy. Well, how far back do you want to go, right?
We start from the very beginning, from that stormy night.
Yes. Well, my background in law really focused on labor and employment issues. Um, and I really enjoy labor and employment law. It's really interesting. The law is always changing. It's very political. So, if we have a Republican administration, the law is going to change. If we have a Democrat administration, law is going to change. There's also 50 states with their own, spin on things. Some states have more labor and employment laws than others. So it's just a very exciting area. Plus, it's also a very human area. So there's always a story. There's always a worker. There's always a supervisor. So it's just an interesting area all around and makes for a lot of great stories. So was with a pretty large firm for many years. And while at the very large firm, um, I was asked one time to give a talk to a group of home care agency owners on some changes in the labor and employment law. So as an eager young associate, of course, I said yes. And I went and I gave the talk, and it wasn't my first time speaking, but it was the first time I got a really vibrant reaction from the audience, like, we want to hear more, this is important. And I didn't realize how game-changing this rule change was. This has to do back in 2013, 2014, when the live-in rules were being changed at the federal level, at the federal DOL. And so I was invited back multiple times. I ended up getting my my number one client through that speaking engagement. And
Wow.
if they're listening, they know who they are. And so yeah, I started representing home care agencies, and it's been great. I've been serving the industry ever since. Sort of my reputation grew in that industry. I then moved on from that firm to my last firm, where I joined them as chair of the home healthcare practice group. They were a national labor and employment firm, so it really allowed me to sort of present myself out there on a national level. Before, I was with a large firm that was focused in the Northeast. And
Okay.
of course, when I joined that firm, the last firm, it was right before COVID. So all my plans about, taking the home care industry by storm and going to different associations and different things kind of got put on hold. But it still was a wonderful opportunity. And I did get to meet a lot more clients. Of course, home care went through the ringer during COVID. And
Uh-huh.
in many ways, home care was really on the front lines, helping people stay in their homes, especially the most vulnerable people, seniors, to stay home and not go into facilities and things like that. So, of course, home care had a lot of questions that needed answers, and there weren't a lot of answers to give. So it was a lot of strategizing, a lot of sort of outside the box thinking, looking at analogous scenarios. Like, I look back to H1N1 for a frame of reference, for example, if you remember that.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting. And then, so Pierson Ferdinand is actually the largest law firm startup in US history. It launched in 2024 with 130 partners. We're now over 250 partners, which is very exciting, but it's very organic growth. We're a very unique law firm. We're not the traditional large international law firm. We are a large international law firm, but we are partner only. And we're extremely flexible, extremely nimble, extremely lean in how we handle matters. So you get partners who basically, grew up in the legal industry in large law firms, large traditional law firms, and then decided they wanted a lot more autonomy, a lot more flexibility. And that's what we have at Pierford, as we like to call it. And so I've been there since April of 24, and it's been absolutely game changing for me, wonderful for my clients. My rates are lower than they would be if I had, stayed at the traditional firm.
Mhm.
And so we do everything for our clients. I still focus mainly on labor and employment, but when it comes to home care, of course, having served that segment for as long as I have, I work on their services agreements. I help them with regulatory issues. But I have a wonderful team in our home health and home care practice group. So we do M&A deals. We help with government audits. We help with commercial transactions, commercial litigation, uh, trademarks, intellectual property, non-compete issues. So we deal with basically everything that a home care agency uh, could run into.
Yeah. And so it's funny that you described the way that what did you call it, Pierford? Is that what the short
Pierford,
form?
Pierford.
Pierford. It's
Yes,
interesting the way you describe it. A lot of the ways you describe the agency being different also relates so much to the home care agency. It's got to be nimble. It's so diverse.
right.
And so it seems suited actually as like a leader in the home care space. So when you are, what would you say is kind of the biggest reason why an agency would reach out to you? Is it usually because an audit is coming? Is it usually because they've run into an issue in the competitive space, or is it so vast, or is there something that sticks out the most for
Yeah,
you today?
it is vast. Let's face it, right? People tend to be more reactive than proactive. So a lot of times if it's a new client, it's because they've run into a problem and they're not sure who to turn to and somebody's, introduced them to me.
Okay.
But a lot of my existing clients, I'm very proud of them because a lot of them are extremely proactive. And so they're calling me, when they're growing or when
Yeah.
they're, expanding or taking on another agency, or it's time for them to sell or find a strategic buyer for their agency so they can, grow or exit. So it really is everything. Of course, my favorite type of thing to do with an agency is kind of help them problem solve, avoid issues, avoid litigation, or resolve a dispute before it turns into litigation versus, litigation itself. I've done a lot of litigation. At this point, though, I will hand that off to my litigator partners who are all rock stars when it comes to handling litigation so that I can stay focused on my sweet spot, which is helping business people from a more collaborative standpoint, problem solving standpoint.
Right. So kind of working with them as well, their partner and as they grow in their
Exactly.
goals and being proactive. Okay. And
Yep.
so can knowing that you come from an extensive background in labor law, can I ask you, is our industry a beast compared to others because of the remote aspect, because of the aspect of being in people's homes, because of the aspect of agency owners not being with their employees, being able to see what's happening at all times? Does it make the industry more complicated, would you say, or is it just like any other?
Yeah, it's I wouldn't use the word beast,
Okay.
but I get what
Okay,
you're
not a
saying.
beast.
No, it's certainly no worse than any other industry. It really is just different. I mean, the everything you mentioned certainly adds complexity, right? You're not seeing your employees, but at the same time, you know, caregivers tend to be very loving people, very caring people. Assuming you're you've really refined your hiring practices, right? To get
Yeah.
those ones who are genuinely caregivers at heart. I mean, I'm pleased to say, my mom was a certified home health aide before she retired in New Jersey. The most caring person you can find. And my clients routinely rave about how wonderful their caregivers are. When I see you next week at the HCAOA National Conference, one of the uh, wonderful feature segments of it is the Caregiver of the Year award, and I always like to see the nominees and hear their stories. And you always got to bring a pack of tissues because you will be in
Yeah.
tears when you hear this caregiver come up and give usually her, but sometimes his,
Yeah.
story about how they got in and what they do. And there's so much humility. So it is a mix. Of course, they're not all wonderful, not all humans are wonderful people. And so some do take advantage. Um, so yeah, there are some unique features on the wage and hour side. There's a lot of unique features, certainly around the timesheets and EVV. And if you have live-ins, that's a particularly complex area that I've helped a lot of agencies deal with, both from a proactive
Mhm.
side and also a DOL investigation side, litigation side. So it just has its own unique uh, complexities.
Yeah, okay, good answer. And it's not a beast, everyone. That came out of my mouth. But actually, it leads me to my first planned question, which are, given all the experience and all the agencies you've worked with, if you got an agency walking in today to say, look, I'm coming with you proactively, I'm small, I'm starting to hire and scale, what are the things you would suggest that they keep in mind, what they want to avoid with hiring? What are some missteps that might lead to future issues?
Yeah. So, and I guess by the time this is published, I will have given my breakout presentation at the HDAOA conference, which is relevant. It's called Hiring and Firing Without Fear, Legal Insights and Best Practices. Um, for those who perhaps didn't get to attend, I'm going to go ahead and give you my very first principle. I'm going to
Yeah.
cover 7 principles at my talk. One of them, the first one is don't neglect your intuition. Um,
Mm,
this is really such a human focused field. You're not making products, you're dealing with people, your chief assets are, people. And so you really have to rely on that intuition, that you've gained through just being a human and living life. And um, if it doesn't feel like it's the right fit, you probably should go with your gut, because it's amazing how many times I work with an agency or somebody in a different field and we're dealing with some sort of dispute or litigation, and I'm talking to the manager, the business owner, and they're like, I had a feeling about this person. I didn't feel good about hiring them, but I went ahead and hired them anyway. And it's like, you should not have ignored your intuition.
mm,
So that's really a big one. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to hiring, you have to have a good system. You have to have a good process. Uh, from your application, actually, even before your application, right? Your job post. Nowadays, we have a lot of states that have passed laws that require you to put a lot more disclosures, even in your job post, things like rates of pay. And of course, you've got ban the box states, which means, you have to be mindful of whether or not you're going to ask about criminal history. And of course, home care is the kind of industry where that is a
yeah.
relevant factor, but you still have to make sure that you comply with your applicable state and local laws. So, and then you have to have a good process. A lot of times people, let's say the business owner has a good intuition and has a good set of experience, set of skills and experience when it comes to hiring, but they've never reduced those to some sort of a checklist. And,
Yeah.
every hire that the business owner makes is a good one, but the business owner goes on vacation, leaves hiring to an office manager, and that person is using his or her skills and intuition and experience, which may not be as extensive as the owners. And so since there's no checklist, since there are no guidelines, that person ends up making a hire that the business leader would not have made. So
Right.
you want to pass on that knowledge, insight, experience, intuition, reduce it to some sort of a checklist so that you can leverage the members of your team so that they can make hires the way you would have made those hires.
So what I heard there really is scalability. You want to be able to deduce the best practice into something that you can hand off to somebody in your absence, and then also you can keep everything moving and growing. And I mean, I guess one of the values of partnering with a company like yours is that you have the experience and you've seen what has happened to create and maybe help them create those best practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I need to write a book because the amount of crazy things that I've
Oh,
seen in home care, um, you you wouldn't believe it.
yeah. Yes. Well, I used to be a caregiver, so I might, but I bet I have not
Okay.
seen but your end of it, you're seeing the stuff. So I
Right.
a spoiler alert, a book is coming. Pressure's on. My next question is about background and credential checks. So, of course,
Sure.
I'm pretty sure any level of hiring at an agency level, there is some base need for this. What would you say is the best practice when approaching that? And I know that's a loaded question because you guys do work all over the United States, correct?
Yes. Yeah. And it is a state specific issue. This is not like a federal issue, but and home care is really interesting in that every state deals with home care differently. There's some states that don't regulate it at all, some states that regulate it very heavily, and some states that, are somewhere in between. And oftentimes there is going to be some sort of state mandated background check, right? So obviously you have to make sure you comply with that. And if you happen to be in a state that does not mandate some sort of a background check, it's still a best practice to have some kind of a background check because there's a common law claim you can have. It's just called negligent hiring, which means as an employer, you should have known that the person you hired was some sort of predator. And had you bothered to, spend $25 or whatever it is to check, you would have figured out that they have, seven serious convictions involving abuse of elderly or assault or sexual abuse or things along those lines. So it is a best practice to do some kind of a check. And of course, if you're participating in Medicaid or some government program, they're also going to require you to do what's called an OIG check, where you run their name against this government database to make sure that they're not excluded by the government from participating in that program. I did once have a client who um, so that if I may sort of like pivot a little bit off of your question, because
Yeah.
a lot of agency owners listening to this, they're either doing this already or maybe I just gave them a small little bit of a tip. But really issues come up regarding how you do this rather than what you should do, right? And I had a particular client one time who they were using pen and paper to track their OIG checks because the OIG it's a government website. All you have to do is go on there. So it sounds so simple and it's free. And why pay somebody when you could just go on a free website? Well, here's why: because they were doing it pen and paper, and somebody's job was to write the name of the caregiver and then yes, I checked them on this date. Well, somebody fell through the cracks, and of course, the one person who fell through the cracks was a person who had you checked, you would have
Of
gotten it.
course.
You're not hired.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds so simple, but this actually resulted in a DOJ investigation because you're basically taking government money that you're not
Mhm.
allowed to take in this instance. So we had to deal with the Federal Department of Justice. I had to deal with an assistant U.S. attorney, and they brought in the state's attorney general's office. So I had to deal with the assistant attorney general as well and try to negotiate and explain to them why this was a mistake, not some sort of a way to cheat the government. And it was a process. We got a good,
Yes,
but it was certainly a painful process for the client, and it was totally avoidable. Turns out there's a vendor that for about $300 a year will do all of this for you on a monthly basis.
yes,
So 300 bucks would have saved this client uh, thousands of dollars in legal
yeah,
fees and thousands of more dollars in government penalties.
for sure. I mean, that's the thing, guys. There are a lot of vendors for a reason, and some of this stuff is totally worth investing in. And just a plug for CareSmartz, our system is that, being able to document and having a checklist of what you need for your caregivers is so important. And what a great way to know that it's in the cloud and not getting lost in some,
Mm,
between some two sheets of paper. And you know what? I bet you that they'll find that piece of paper in 3 years, but they don't need it anymore. That was a great story. It
right.
made me think of something. Your agency or your firm is a large one. Would you
Mhm.
say that your clients that you're able to help are a certain size, or does it range in terms of how large an agency is?
Yeah, it does range, and obviously, the bigger the agency, the more challenges that they're going to have. But because of our firm's flexible model, um, I work with agencies that are 25 caregivers plus. A lot of them are mom and pop. A lot of agency owners, this is their second career. They've had some sort of executive life at some big company, and now they've left that and they want to do something that they find more meaningful. I find a lot of agency owners have had to either care for a loved one or find care for a loved one, and they end up going, I can do this better than this mess that I just went through taking care of my mom or my dad. So yeah, we have the flexibility to work with agencies of all sizes.
Okay, that's good to know. And in terms of the work that you all do, because we've gone through a few scenarios now with managing, the employment aspect of it, managing, the client aspect of it, and then also kind of the government agencies. And so would you say that you guys are kind of equipped to get involved in all of those different parties?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I focus more on labor and employment and home care specific issues, but my M&A team is amazing. I've got a client right now that's a home care agency that's selling after, a long successful run. They want to move on. I've got partners who are former assistant U.S. attorneys, so they've been with the Department of Justice, and so they're well equipped to handle any sort of investigation. I've got a client right now that's facing a pretty significant um, DOJ investigation involving PPP loans, things like that, and we're talking about high stakes stuff, multi-million dollar exposure matters or multi-million dollar M&A deals. We're equipped to handle all of these things.
Okay. So when it comes to going back to the employment side of it, which is the part that fascinates me, again, just because I was a caregiver and knowing, the additional risks that can be added with the nature of our industry. Some people, you hope that things go for the best, you hire as best that you can, and then inevitably in a business, in a life of a business, there will be, need for terminations. So knowing that, an agency might be moving along and everything's fine and good, how can they prepare to secure, their reasoning behind letting, an employee go? What are some of the things that they can keep record of or document in terms of that aspect?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this tends to come up more for, I would say, at least the conversations I end up having typically involve office staff more than they involve caregivers. They do involve caregivers too. But caregivers, oftentimes they see the writing on the wall, they move on. Their mobility is so, tremendous. They're able to just jump agency to agency that if they don't think it's working out for them at agency one, they're just going to go to agency two. And they might already be working for agency two while working
Yeah.
for agency one. So I'm not usually talking terminations about caregivers. Usually it is office staff, and these are individuals who are usually, fairly well paid, and so there's a lot of risk there. Their mobility is not as fluid and immediate as it is with caregivers, so that there tends to be a little bit more risk. So yeah, as far as documentation goes, it really is it's a best practice, right, to have some sort of rationale for what you're doing. You don't want to have to count on, well, if they accuse me of discrimination or retaliation or some sort of wrongful termination, I'll be able to explain it then. Well, then might mean, in a year or two. And maybe the people that were involved, maybe the HR manager is not with your company anymore. Maybe their direct supervisor is not with your agency anymore. So you want to sort of answer that question up front. And
Yeah.
you don't have to give the employee, a full, explanation as to why their employment's being terminated, but you do want to have some sort of internal record. Um, that's funny. Actually, I just put out my quarterly newsletter. It's my first one ever, and in it, I provided two-part template for companies for how to coach an employee, so that you have that sort of paperwork. And the reason for the template is because this is something employers hate to do. They like working with people, but they hate to have to criticize people or tell them what they did wrong or try to get them to correct their ways. It's an awkward process at best for a lot of people. So I try to sort of take the difficulty out of it and make it sort of a simple or more comfortable process. But you want to have some sort of an email where you say, "Hey, listen, here's the company policy. Here's how what you didn't, maintain company policy. Here's the impact that this has on the business when we don't do it. So can I count on you to please do it going forward?" And you want to get that employee to go, "Yes, of course." It'd be funny if they said no, right? That would
Yeah.
sort of cut that relationship pretty short. But most people, if they're called out on something they did wrong, they're going to say, "Yeah, yeah, I didn't mean to." And that way, it's very casual, it's very comfortable, but then it you have something that memorializes that we did have a conversation about something that's important, that affects our clients, that affects coworkers, that affects the business. And
Yeah.
then if you do have to terminate, then you want at least some sort of internal record where, let's say, if it is a what I call a mom and pop, where you have two business partners, partner A writes to partner B, "Hey, we're gonna let this employee go. I told them before we really can't have this type of misstep. They told me they weren't going to do it, but it happened, one or two or three more times. We just don't think we can move forward." You know, that way you have that in the file to be able to articulate your rationale that it was a legitimate business reason and not due to some protected characteristic or some protected complaint or some leave of absence that the person took that's protected.
Yeah. It makes me think of what you mentioned earlier about empowering other staff to be able to know like those steps in hiring those
Right.
best steps. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's being able to, document this stuff and have kind of a way that you do it so that you always have that to go back to. Um, what was I? Oh God, I had this thought. So with the it being awkward, it's hard to have these conversations. I mean, I guess this is why a lot of agencies in any business should really be having conversations about coaching and status of your employment and how you're doing regardless, because it's easier to have those when you can also give them a compliment and maybe tell them what's
100%.
going well, right?
Yes, that's part of my template too, right? Is you want to, if you're having that conversation, you want to say, "Hey, just want to sort of touch base on performance. Here's a few things that you're doing well. We really appreciate that. And here's something that happened yesterday that we just want to make sure you're aware because it was pretty significant. For example, in home care, um, you know, a, a a potential client called in requesting care, and our policies, we got to get back to this person or escalate this within X amount of time, and you didn't do that. Now in this case, we did salvage it, so it's a near miss, but it's still a violation. It's still something that shouldn't have happened. Or in this instance, we see that this person called looking for care, and then you know because it didn't get routed to the right party, when the right party did find out about it and reach out, they had already secured care from another agency. So it kind
Right.
of you want it to be organic. You want it to you don't want to just say, "Well, our policy's X," and you didn't stick to it. No, you want to always sort of show people that when you don't follow our procedure, it hurts your coworkers, it hurts our clients, it hurts the business, so that it just sort of explains itself.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that comes up a lot when I demo for agencies and they're talking about role management, how do I control an employee going and starting a new agency taking all my clients? So I'm assuming that this comes up for you.
Sure.
Non-compete, NDAs, and how what your best practices are there on that topic.
Yeah, so you've hit on another topic that's very state specific. So non-compete agreements, non-solicitation agreements, these are very state specific. So we would have to be talking about a particular jurisdiction to
Okay.
give the best advice. And in home care, it's interesting. Some states have laws specifically targeting um, ensuring caregivers have mobility. So New
Uh,
Jersey is an example, Connecticut is an example. You have certain limits on what you can and can't require a caregiver to agree to. Some states also restrict what sort of prohibition you can put on a client too. But
mm,
in general, speaking purely in general terms, Um, you know, NDAs, we're talking about protecting confidential information like client lists, caregiver lists, protecting confidential information that's pretty enforceable. So you want to have an agreement as part of your onboarding package that, people agree that these things are confidential and that they're not going to disclose them or use them inappropriately. In a lot of jurisdictions, you can also prohibit solicitation, meaning, you can't ask our clients to follow you to a different agency, or you can't solicit our caregivers or office staff to jump ship to a different agency. Uh, a lot of jurisdictions that's allowable. Again, it's really state by state. And then when it comes to like a true non-compete, meaning, if you work for me, you are not allowed to open an agency within, 10-mile, 25-mile radius of my agency. That is the most difficult to enforce. And as a practical um, aspect, I mean, that's the kind of thing that you would only really have with your executive leaders. If you're talking about
Right.
actually like opening a competing business where you're not going to solicit my clients, you're not going to solicit my caregivers. I just don't want another agency within my territory, so to speak. That it is potentially enforceable with executive, if you have a COO or your business partner, these things, these are the kinds of key people who, just by virtue of them starting a competing business, that will, and because of what they know about you and your agency, that's going to give them an unfair competitive advantage that, that agreement is intended to address. So yeah, it really is a talk to your lawyer situation because it is so different in different states. But as far as a confidential information, pretty plain vanilla, that should be part of your onboarding package. And if your jurisdiction allows it, I would also suggest a non-solicitation as a part of part of your typical onboarding package, because you're not hurting a caregiver or a member of your office team by prohibiting them from taking clients that your agency has developed. If they want to go work for another agency, that's fine. You don't have to take my clients to be successful. You don't have to take my caregivers to be successful. If you want to work at another agency, work at another agency. Just don't hurt my agency in the process.
Yeah, for sure. I really admire what you do just because there's so much to it. And it's so complicated with all the different states, but it sounds like you've built a real team there. I did want to go back to you mentioning that you've started a quarterly newsletter. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure.
Plug.
So funny that you ask, because it's something I've wanted to do for a long time, but just didn't have the bandwidth, didn't know exactly what I was going to put in it. But and my wife gave me a lot of grief for the name of this thing. I call it the Silk Halves, and it's bow tie themed because I'm, known for my bow ties. You'll see it in my
Yes.
profile picture and all that.
Okay, so this is a
So
signature look.
yeah, yeah, this is my brand.
I love it.
So, and just like a bow tie has two halves, I call it the silk halves. There's a professional half to my newsletter and a personal half. The professional half has some sort of, piece of value that I'm giving to my clients and my friends. Like in this instance, a template that you can just take and adopt, um, so that you can give it to your management team and just to add value. And then on the personal side, I tell people, what's going on with my family. I've got 5 kids, so we're always doing something. And
Sammy, you've got 5 kids watching K-pop Demon Hunters. I pray for you
uh,
tonight.
so yeah, no, I don't think my kids are watching K-pop Demon. I don't even know what that is. Is that a is
Oh,
that
you're
a
lucky. Just
show?
consider yourself lucky. Yes, it's taken
Okay.
over the world by storm.
So yeah, no, they're probably watching other stuff, but yeah, no, we've always got something fun going on. Or I like to read, so I'm always sharing with my clients, what books I'm reading. We'll talk, personal development, business growth, things along those lines. So anyway, it's just a fun way to stay in touch.
That's amazing. So we know that you're going to be writing a book. We're going to hold you to that. And I suppose that you go to different states and often there will be opportunities to see you speak on these topics. And yeah, earlier you mentioned that you got a client from the very first time you went out and spoke. And so it's interesting how it all comes full circle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'd be happy to give that association a shout out. That was the Home Care and Hospice Association of New Jersey.
Okay.
It's a wonderful association for the state of New Jersey. and they have an annual conference in Atlantic City. I actually spoke at it this past summer. And yeah, so that's where it all began for me anyway, for home care. And now I'm, enjoying traveling, like you said, to different associations and speaking at the national conference for HCAOA.
And I guess that anyone interested in booking you to speak or interested in being a client can also look up your agency on LinkedIn, as well as the firm, as well as your own, right,
Yeah,
Sami?
very easy to find. Sami Asaad, it's a pretty unique name. You Google me, you're going to find me
And
pretty
if you're
easy.
not sure, just make sure it's the guy with the bow tie.
There you go.
Thank you so much for your time and your insights, Sami. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me again.